but it gives me great pleasure to introduce our next segment. I started listening to Brian's podcast shortly after I started my position at MNAPG. And I told Brian this last night. There were times I felt like I was a voyeur. I'm not in recovery, nor do I gamble, and the intimacy of the sharing sometimes made me wonder if I had the right to be listening. And I knew that by continuing to listen, it would build my understanding and empathy of gambling addiction. So I am a regular listener to All In, the podcast for addictive gamblers, and I've been so grateful for the insights I gained from listening and so appreciate Brian's willingness to be vulnerable with his listeners. Brian is a trailblazer when it comes to gambling addiction podcasts. His was the first, started in 2015, and continues today. And if you haven't yet tuned in, I highly recommend it. And we have links to the podcast on our website. Brian's frequent co-host is Jeff Wasserman. Jeff, in his own right, is another rock star in the recovery community. Jeff facilitates a number of meetings each week in addition to the work he does as the Judicial Outreach and Development Director, excuse me, for the Delaware Council on Gambling. I've also had the pleasure of serving with Jeff as an officer of the NCPG Board of Directors. And I've sought out Jeff's insights when wondering if some of our work could potentially be triggering to a person in recovery. Together, these two make an awesome team. They share great chemistry with one another, and their passion to help those struggling with the gambling addiction comes through each episode. So help me in welcoming Brian Hatch and Jeffrey Wasserman.
Hello, Minnesota, and welcome to All In, the Addicted Gamblers podcast. My name is Brian, and I have not placed a bet since July of 2014.
And my name is Jeff. I haven't placed a bet since July of 2015.
Jeff, we're here in Minnesota doing it in front of people. This is incredible.
This is really weird that you're not on the screen.
I know. We stare at each other on these Zoom screens. This is much more interactive.
I kind of like this, though. It's like a talk show.
I felt really silly when they brought out the chairs and the water, and I was like,
I kind of like it.
But we honestly, we can't talk if we're standing because we're so used to talking while we're sitting, so that's why they were nice enough to do this for us. Let's give a round of applause to all the presenters you've seen today, Dr. Timothy Fong, Dr. Leah Nauer, and Jay Robinson. And now none of them are here, so what do you guys really think about everybody? No, they were all terrific, and thank you very much to the Minnesota Alliance on Problem Gambling and Susan Sheridan Tucker and your wonderful staff for having us. We are very excited to be here. As you heard at the beginning, Jeff and I both have lived experience with gambling harm, and I would just ask at this moment if anybody else, I don't want to out you, but if anybody else has been, who is in recovery for a gambling addiction, would just stand up and be recognized for your lived experience, because I applaud you because I am with you. So a little history on the podcast, just so everybody's up to par. The podcast started as a direct result of my recovery. I stopped gambling in July, and in January, I needed to talk about it, but I was broke, and I didn't have any money to go see a therapist. I didn't have insurance. I was living in California at the time, and so I called my friend Chris up, and I said, hey, would you talk to me about my gambling addiction for an hour a week, and we'll put it up as a podcast? And he said, sure. So it started with just me telling my story, which lasted about 10 episodes. And then sometime around episode 20-something, I got an email from somebody who was like, hey, I don't know what a podcast is, but I would love to be on yours.
And it's the truth. I did not know what a podcast was until maybe about a month before I listened to Brian's podcast. Somebody came to me and said, hey, there's this really great podcast about this murder in Baltimore, and I know you were an attorney. And I said, I don't know what a podcast is. And They took my iPhone and they showed me the little icon. And they said, wow, man, this is just like a radio. And they looked at me like I was born in 1920, which sometimes I feel like I was. But when I listened to Brian's podcast, it was the first time that I heard somebody share their story, but in a way that was riveting. It was entertaining. It was real. You know, I was used to hearing those stories at a GA meeting where people have 5 minutes or so to share on a particular topic. With Brian, I felt like I followed it. It was almost like watching Netflix. I wanted to just go to the next episode. And so I said, hey, that would be a really neat thing to do. If you're interested in having me, I'd be glad to. And 3-4 months later, I got a response.
I will happily give everybody in this room my email address, but you'll get a response at some point down the road. That's the only bad part about trying to keep up with something, is having to keep up with it. But we're up to episode 347. Most of that is lived experience stories. I say most because, of course, we have on rock stars like Susan Sheridan Tucker, episode 225, if you're curious about your executive director.
And she tells it all.
T. Fong, who was here, was on episode 115, if you're curious about what he talks about more. But, I mean, you got double sessions with him, so maybe you're good right now. But down the road, if you want to go back and listen. But I encourage everybody to listen. You said it in the back earlier that you give out the podcast to clients or ask people to give it out to clients. And the reason that people do that is because they get to hear stories of lived experience. It just really helps people not feel alone. I'm a very detailed-oriented person, not in my own work, but when I'm trying to do something. And if somebody just says, well, you get into recovery and then you become okay, that doesn't help me. I'm like, well, where did you go? What door did you open up? Where did you park? I need details about things. And so the podcast provides that. We have people who go through Gamblers Anonymous. We have people who don't like Gamblers Anonymous. We have people tell their stories who are male, who are female, from all different cultures. We try to get everybody on there so that way anybody listening will, if they can grab the right episode, will hear somebody that they can relate to. We have people who play poker, people who did the slots. Jeff and I are both guilty of that. People who sports bet. And everybody who has come on, we've had all sorts of different gambling. Stock market had a very good episode on the stock market and day trading with somebody who that was their form of gambling. So we have had the pleasure of doing many, many episodes telling these stories and trying to ignite a conversation, a national conversation about gambling, because you don't get it. I was just telling Jeff a minute ago that once a week I will I will Google the phrase gambling addiction, and then I'll click on news just to see what's going on with it. And if you do that these days, there's news stories almost every day. There didn't used to be. It was the same thing week in and week out. But now there are more stories about gambling addiction, people getting people to help. And I'm pleased to say that now there's not just one podcast about gambling harm. There are at least 20. It's a small community, but a lot of us know each other. There's some good ones, and I'm sure we'll throw out their names. A couple of one that I want to share with you is called the Broke Girl Society. It's done by our friend Christina Cook. It's aimed at women in recovery. However, it's open to everybody. And she also has a wonderful face group that comes with it. She's a gem. She's been doing it now for about 1.5 years. And she and I do a YouTube thing together as well, where it's essentially just this, but on YouTube. It's just a podcast, but on YouTube. So we try to get different perspectives and things like that, and that's called The Bet Free Life. If you're looking for that, you don't have to go watch it, but if you feel like it. But we're here to talk a bit about sports.
Yeah, before we get into that, so Brian, we've been here for what, 24 hours or so?
Yes, I left yesterday, arrived about, yeah.
And we both talk, even though Brian is from Michigan, this was your first time in Minnesota, there's my New York accent.
I am originally from Michigan, but I live in Connecticut.
Yeah, outside of the airport, right?
Yes.
Both of us have been in Minnesota before, but only at the airport. So what's your experience like in the last 24 hours, getting to know the people of Minnesota?
So I left my house. I passed 2 DraftKings billboards on the way to the airport. At the airport, I looked on my phone while I was sitting in my seat. I looked at ESPN.com, where I got advertised to by DraftKings. Then I looked at Reddit, where I got advertised to by both DraftKings and FanDuel. Then I was in your lovely airport where I walked by a vending machine with scratch-off tickets in it. And then Jeff and I said, let's get some food. So we found a place down the street.
Wait. I said to Brian, want to look up a place that's, not too far, we can Uber there. And he comes up with a place called?
Well, it's called Full Tilt.
Full Tilt. Now,
You
it
should
didn't
have
occur
known
to
by
me,
the name.
Right. What was going on there, but we were hungry enough where we would have gone anywhere except the casino. So go ahead.
So inside of Full Tilt, they have a lot of video games. So I assumed the Full Tilt was more aimed at these video games and pinball machines and whatever they do. And Jeff and I think about 10 minutes went by before we turned around, and directly behind us where we were sitting was a window. Above it said gambling, and all they sell are pull tabs. A whole window just to sell pull tabs. And I'm not exaggerating. I kept saying it to Jeff out loud every time it happened. The guy in the red shirt's going back up there. The guy in the red shirt's going back up there. And it was no fewer than 10 times that he was up at this window. We were there for an hour and a half. And he went up to the window 10 times, coming back with stacks of these pull tabs. And then we saw other people with iPads on a stand.
And I had to remind Brian, at once we were the guys in the red shirts.
That's true.
It's hard to believe, but
That's
it was.
true.
But getting to the sports, there were screens. There was yesterday was Sunday, so it was all the football games were on screens. And,
where we were advertised to by DraftKings.
We were advertised to. But, there's a lot of, this is a sports area, right? Like, I'm from Wilmington, Delaware, which is very close to Philadelphia. We all know the reputation of Philadelphia sports fans. It's a very sports-oriented environment. But, sitting in the bar and people cheering for Dallas, cheering against Dallas, or booing Dallas, you can't tell if they had a bet on the game. And, you mentioned about sports betting. One of the things that I think is so unique about sports betting is that people that have a sports betting problem or bet a lot on sports, they are about as passionate for their sports and their teams as they are for their bets. And sometimes it's really difficult to notice the difference. And that becomes challenging when, as Dr. Fong had mentioned, when somebody says, well, do I have to not watch sports? So how would you, we're both peers now, and we both work and are exposed to a lot of gamblers that are in recovery or just starting recovery. And I think just as the statistics showed from UCLA, at least in my experience, and I think Brian's as well, most of the people that we are exposed to now that are younger, they are coming in to recovery as a result of a sports-focused gambling addiction. Very different than it was just 5 years ago, in my view. So how would you respond if somebody came to you and said, do I have to give up sports?
I would say no, you don't have to give up sports. If you think sports is going to trigger you, then you might not want to watch, but watch a game. We just had the beginning of the football season, and two of my clients back in Connecticut, one of them said, I just want to watch the Buffalo Bills game. That's all I want to do. Can I do that? I said, yes, you can do that. But if you notice that you get triggered and then want to go gamble, then stop doing that. Don't do it anymore. And so sure enough, that client watched the Buffalo Bills and came back and said, I didn't think about gambling except when they advertised it to me, which is unfortunately throughout the game these days. But he was not triggered, and he was able to watch his favorite team without any money on it and not feel sweaty and guilty. And I thought that was a good win for him. The other client did not fare as well. The other client didn't even make it to watching the game, and unfortunately the other client had a recurrence due to fantasy football. The client really wanted to participate in fantasy football. The client's girlfriend did not want him to participate in fantasy football. He chose the fantasy football, and then unfortunately the girlfriend said, well, then I'm done. And that triggered him into relapsing. Strangely enough though, young guy, and uses a bookie, not the online apps, which are readily available in Connecticut. We have 3, DraftKings, FanDuel, and Sugar House that you can use in Connecticut. I remember
I was shocked the first time I heard from a college-age kid that was a sports bettor that he used bookies. Now, I'm from New York, and to me, when I think of a bookie, this was like a movie in the 1960s that if you don't pay them back, they're going to break your legs. Well, these bookies, these new age bookies, many of them are college students that are using being a bookie to finance their college. And who do they get for clients, if you will? College students. So bookies is something that is here. It's not just a relic of the past. And that's definitely one opportunity that young people, even underage people, have to bet on sports in a state like Minnesota where it's not legal yet. The other thing that I was shocked at was when this kid says, we call ourselves, I'm in a social group on Twitter, and we call ourselves the degenerate gamblers. Now, when I started to learn about gambling addiction and in my professional capacity, I was told degenerate is the only word that's used for people with addiction. That is stigmatizing, it is insulting, it shows the character as opposed to the addiction. But here's this kid telling me, degenerate gambler for that stage in life is a badge of honor. And the point is that we have to know these things if we're going to connect. And I couldn't agree more with what Dr. Fong said about the importance of connection. So if you connect with somebody that has a sports betting addiction, I would suggest if you don't know what an under-over bet is or a parlay, then you should actually learn about it, because they're not going to connect with you unless you can speak their language. Whether the language is degenerate gambler, I'm not there yet. But certainly I know the lingo, I know how the bets are made, and that is a great way to have that conversation and to expand things.
Jeff and I are both casino gamblers. We liked our roulette, blackjack, and slots. That was a progression that really was terrible. Slots are, there's no point, and yet I continue to do it. Just wishing, sticking money in and wishing. My sports knowledge came after the fact, and talking to all these clients and people on the podcast and people in Jeff's support group who gambled on sports, and that's how I learned about it. And of course, nowadays on ESPN, every show talks the over-under is in the lines, and there's the bad beats section, and so all you need is a couple of YouTube lessons, and you can learn all the lingo that you'll want to know. These days, just sliding a little to the left, I just want to say that I could not be more excited that Barstool is no longer in the sports betting game. If you're unfamiliar with what I'm talking about, Barstool was the brand partner of Penn Gaming. Penn Gaming is active in Pennsylvania and other places where they're the operator. They partnered with Barstool, purchased a big chunk of Barstool, but Barstool's responsible gambling lingo was not very good. In fact, their messaging was just awful. So it's good that Barstool is no longer in the game of sports betting, because the leader of Barstool, the president, the stool president himself, would make giant unrealistic bets. Now, this man is a millionaire many times over, and he would make bets and encourage people to bet, showing his stuff on Twitter, and that just always felt very dirty, as this guy can bet $40,000 on a game, and the average person who listens to him, who looks up to him, cannot. So it's good that Barstool is no longer in that game. The bad part of that is Penn dropped Barstool for ESPN. So now you will see more gambling content on ESPN. All the gambling content is out there anyways, but these companies like DraftKings and FanDuel have their own networks now where they employ people who used to work at ESPN to come on and do a morning show, all geared towards gambling, completely representative of gambling. And this is what we are in now, this cycle of just constant gambling. I sent Jeff a screenshot of my Reddit screen because I came across a thread, not in the problem gambling Reddit thread, which is a wonderful Reddit thread if any of you want to check that out. Lots of stories of gambling harm, but just a thread by itself that was literally, is anybody else sick of all these gambling ads taking over sports? And people were responding, and I was just pleased to see that sort of
I mean, I think that is the positive side to sports betting. 5 years ago, when we used to go do outreach efforts in our community, we had to talk to many people and tell them about that gambling can be an addiction. We don't have to say that anymore because people see the commercials, they read the stories, it's on the news all the time. They're exposed to it. Even people that had no interest in thinking about problem gambling or gambling addiction, they just hate the frequency of commercials. And I don't know if you guys get it out here, but I'm in the Philadelphia market, so you can't watch TV for longer than 10 or 15 minutes without a FanDuel, DraftKings, Caesars, MGM commercial. I mean, it is everywhere. I'm from Delaware, as I said. Our claim to fame is 3 weeks from the day that the Supreme Court issued its order that allowed states to legalize sports betting, we were up and running. 3 weeks from the day. And on the front page of the newspaper, in our largest newspaper in Delaware, was the governor holding the ticket that he just bet on the Phillies game. And nothing about a problem. Were we consulted when legal sports betting came to Delaware? Not one bit. Nobody wanted our opinion. Nobody sought our advice. Nobody asked whether or not we think that's going to expand the population that we serve that has a gambling problem. I think it's different now. I think people are much more aware. I'm not suggesting that I'm advocating for more commercials to get people aware, but it is what it is. And now that it's everywhere, I think we're much more able to have a conversation, and people will understand what you're talking about because they've seen it. They've seen the commercials. They've seen the stories of college athletes that have gotten suspended and professional athletes that have gotten suspended because of gambling. So that is an opportunity, I think, that we have to continue that conversation and to educate people about problem gambling.
You know, the other side to what you're talking about is the college athlete who misses, well, you guys just had a bit of this, and I don't know if it was gambling related, but your Minnesota Viking, and I forget his last name, but recently in the news, he had been hassled online with racist slurs thrown at him. And I would very much guarantee that if you go in and look at those comments, those people are probably gamblers. Because that happens to college athletes all the time now. They are harassed by their peers because their peers can bet on them. Excuse me. Their peers can bet on them. So now on college campuses, you have these athletes getting harassed. And generally, you know, the college athlete has a lot better opportunity now than they used to because they can sell their image rights and make money off themselves now. But they still don't deserve to be harassed because some knucklehead lost money on his bet on DraftKings. It's enraging to see those kind of news stories, and they're so commonplace now.
And we talked about earlier about how I think it was Dr. Fung that asked the question: did you ever think years ago all of these, you know, connections of professional sports and gambling operators and regulators and advertisement, that we could draw that line connecting the dots? Of course we didn't think that, because what did every major professional league say about gambling years ago? It's the worst, it's the devil. We'll never be in favor of gambling. And then I guess they just had an epiphany that, hey, maybe this is a way to make money.
Yes, they did, yes. There's a wonderful organization in the UK called The Big Step? The Big Step, yeah. Right? The Big Step. It's founded by James Grimes, and James is somebody with lived experience. People with lived experience keep just doing more things. It's fantastic. James started this organization to get gambling ads off of football jerseys, because they love their football over there, and all of the teams have gambling companies across. And so he started this every couple times a year. They will walk from football field to football field to football pitch to football pitch to raise awareness and to ask the teams to take these off. And some of the teams comply, and like, you know what, we should get gambling off of our jerseys. I am absolutely convinced that that's where we are headed here, 100% LeBron James is going to have a gambling company across his chest. Some athletes already do, as Dr. Fong was talking about, do advertise for certain different gambling operators.
How many people like Kevin Hart now? You ever see him in these commercials? Every other commercial, Kevin Hart is advertising. And all I kept thinking is, doesn't he have enough money? Does he have to do that? But that's what, I mean, that's what today's advertising is about. It's about getting the celebrities. And again, that's okay for people that can do this socially and with control. You know, neither one of us, nor, of course, is the Minnesota Council or any of the councils across the country anti-gambling. We're all gambling neutral. We just want to reach out to people for prevention and for treatment and for recovery. But we're fighting this big conglomerate of advertising and celebrities and one of your favorites, Brian, free bets.
Oh yeah, free bets are when, well, are you talking about the incentives that, or are you talking about when they send you your credits in the email?
Okay.
Either way, those incentives drive me insane because they know they're giving you the incentive because they know that once you run out of their money, you're going to use your own money because you're going to be, even if it's not a long-term addiction, in that moment, you're going to be kind of addicted and think, well, I didn't lose anything. I can just use $10 or $20 of my own money. And then that grows and that grows and that grows. And so I wish they would get rid of the incentives. I wish they would get rid of the corny phrasing. Dr. Fong said it, the no sweat bets, the risk-free bets, all of those lies that are told. And they are lies because there's always risk in every bet that you make.
I was going to say, I know that Minnesota doesn't have sports betting now, but it's very, very analogous, in my view, to slot play, right? How many casinos send their patrons free slot dollars? They do that, at least in the casinos in my area. And I remember a woman that came in, she was in GA for a while, and she had been successful in her abstinence and never changed her date. But in a conversation, she talked about how she was at the casino playing slots with free slot dollars, but she didn't feel like she had to change her date because it wasn't betting. She wasn't gambling, it was free. And the whole mindset, and that's obviously that's what the casinos want to make people feel. That's why the free bets are there, to make people come in. Oh, you're not gambling because you can't lose because you're playing with our money. Of course, they don't tell you the next step is when you lose those slot dollars or free bets, what are you going to do, particularly if you have a gambling issue? That's when you're going to dig into your own pocket, and now it's your money. So it's just enticement, like you said. It's just a seductive way to get people to gamble.
Jeff and I both went to the sports betting communities. It's their trade show. And if you walk in and it's just booth after booth of people trying to get you to engage with the app longer. Or in some instances it was, well, come for the sports betting, but stay for the online casino. And that was their dirty little secret for a while, which was how do we get people to go from the sports betting while between bets or waiting for their bet to pay out over to the casino, because that's where we can really get them and really get money made. And so all these booths were dedicated to how do we keep people engaged. And it was exhausting being there. I don't think that we're going to return ever because it is the opposite of this, where everybody wants to be helpful. There, everybody just, yeah, no.
You know, with sports betting, I think that there are so many moving parts that even if you are a seasoned therapist in gambling addiction, there's still this curve that you're going to have to navigate in order to be acquainted with what I would say, the unique challenges of somebody in recovery as a result of a sports betting addiction or a gambling addiction with a focus on sports betting. In my experience, so many sports bettors bet because they think that their skill and knowledge of sports changes the odds. They may understand that everything is a risk, but they view it as this is a smart risk, because with my knowledge of the statistics of each player, of who's going to win the game, of who's not, I know that I can use this as my revenue-generating hobby. And some even take it further, as I want to become a professional sports bettor because of that knowledge and skill. And Brian said, the two of us did slot machines, right? So skill is not involved with slot machines, in case anybody didn't know that. But there is still this connection, because once that sports bettor that has a problem, at least in my experience, starts to bet on outcomes of the game, right? And really studies and using their knowledge and their skill. If they want to advance to that next level of gambling, because all of a sudden their bets on the outcome are just not satisfying enough, that's when you get into the parlays. And I don't want to wait till the whole game to be finished. Let's just bet on the first quarter of this basketball game. And then, even worse yet, in-play betting. And just like I think Dr. Fong mentioned, in-play betting, no different than putting money in a slot machine. Absolutely no skill. So if you can talk to that sports bettor in recovery who thinks that their gambling is different and will look down upon other gamblers because they don't have the knowledge, they don't have all of the skills that it'll take to be successful, talk to them about their in-game betting. How much do they think before they bet on the next pitch? Or they bet on the coin flip? And that's what happens. With those people that have a problem, sports betting is just like any other gambling with absolutely no skill. It's all a matter of risk and obviously resulting harm.
Yeah, somewhere along the line, we went from you have to fly to Atlantic City or Las Vegas to gamble, or you have to use a bookie to bet on the over-under of the entire game, to you can do everything right here on your phone all day long. That toilet picture is no lie.
No.
We are both in a support group with at least 2 people who admitted to doing that.
Yeah.
This stuff is real, and it's scary, and it's so, I mean, you say gambling neutral. I love gambling, and I'm happy that it exists and that people can do it, but man, does it turn on you so quickly. I knew I was 18 years old, and I went to the casino with some friends to play blackjack because somebody said, hey, let's go do that, because it was a tribal casino. We could go in at 18 in Michigan. And so I went up, and I hadn't been to a casino before, and I was hooked immediately. I won that night. I hit a blackjack, and I went home with like 150 bucks. And I went, that's more than I'm going to make at work tomorrow. I should come back and do this. And before you know it, I was back there, and I was by myself, and I was driving 5 hours round trip to go gamble all night long. I wasn't going to class. I got kicked out of college. But I knew 3 months in, I called the helpline. But I thought, I'm 18. I don't have a gambling. I'm 18. I can't have an addiction already. I just started. I wish I had listened to myself, because I did not, and 14 years of harm ensued. It is a sick. I applaud all of you who are clinicians or peers or counselors who help people like us, because without you, we would just be silent. Now, yes, we have GA, and GA was talked about, and GA is a wonderful program, absolutely. It is peer recovery, and you get to get in there and make yourself better and fix your defects of character, so that way you're not just abstinent, you're improving upon yourself. But for some people, it's intimidating to walk into a room full of people that they don't know and be vulnerable. So I completely understand.
You can say that look old. You can say that.
Well, there is some thinking that when it is a room with people of a certain age in it. But lately we've been finding that more younger people are going in and taking the first one I went to, I was 24, and I walked in and everybody was 20 years older, and I was like, it's a little weird. The second meeting I went to, different meeting, walked in and Again, everybody was older, but at that time I didn't care because everybody was so nice and welcoming. You have to find the right room. If you walk into a room once, it might not work for you. Go to a different room. You're going to find a group of people that excite you and make you want to be a better person. And it's so much easier to recover with other people. The opposite of addiction is connection.
I tell people that I'm really 25, but this is what gambling did to me. You got to do what you got to do to get, to get their attention. But what about, especially with sports betting, the whole social piece? In other words, again, I'll generalize and say young males, college age, much of their social life is centered around their friends and sports. They get together on a Sunday to watch a football game. They'll go to a basketball game together. Of course, they'll be talking about the lines, but they did this before they were even gambling because they were passionate fans. So how do you tell somebody that says, I tried watching sports in my recovery, but I had to turn it off because I'm triggered. But now you're telling me I'm going to have to not only give up gambling, I'm going to have to give up my friends, my social life. I mean, is life really worth it if I have to give these two things that I love the most, sports and gambling? What would you say to somebody like that? Not to put you on the spot or anything.
I mean, like what we talked about earlier, it goes back to try it. If you find that it triggers you, then yeah, you got to give it up for now.
I mean, being aware, like you said, is important. And sometimes you do have to try it. Sometimes, you could be the best therapist, the best support person, the best sponsor in GA, and tell somebody, well, this is what you need to do. And you know what? They're not going to do it, or if they do it, they'll try it a couple of times. But if they're not connecting with that opportunity for recovery, it's not going to work. And it's especially not going to work when they start improving. Because let's face it, urgency is a huge tool when it comes to recovery. Nobody has come into my support group meeting unless they were in pain. And I would suggest that most people don't listen to the podcast unless they want to seek help for themselves. But once they get to the point where they're feeling a little better, they haven't gambled in 2 or 3 or 4 months, their finances improved, their relationships improved, that's when oh man, do I really need to go to the meeting, or could I just hang out with my friends, or could I relax tonight and watch Netflix? That is, in my view, that's the most difficult area. That's when relapse is at most likely to occur. It's the feeling good. In one sense, you want people to feel good, but the other sense, you have to make sure that they're cautious. How do you do that? How do you tell somebody that you really need to be on guard, even though you're in a good spot, you're not maybe struggling with gambling urges, your parents are trusting you again, your partner's trusting you? How do you tell people that they have to be just as vigilant, or at least maintain that level of vigilance?
I think we discharged a client, and I said to the client, I was like, I'm so happy that you're leaving under good circumstances, because most of the time people ghost us and we wonder what happened to them. But you're being discharged because you're doing well. But then, I gave but just in case in the future you ever feel like gambling again, here's a list of resources, and you make sure you call this and you do that. And so you have to prepare people. But again, not everybody's recovery is my recovery. So not everyone's going to get triggered again.
No, and just like we said, sometimes people actually have to experience something for themselves to fully embrace it, right?
Jon Stewart on his Apple show that he has, episode from last year, said, America, we are not a preventative society. We all need to touch the oven and make sure it's hot. We can't just take our friend's word for it. We have to, no. Oh, yeah, it is. Yeah.
It sounds simple, but it's true with a lot of people. I mean, we hope that they go to a therapist and learn, or they go to a support group, and especially hear from others that have gone out and gambled again and come back in saying, not only is it just as bad, it's worse than the first time. But there's this thing in our heads that say, yeah, but I'm not like you and you and you, because I'm much more knowledgeable. I have much more intuition. I can control it, until you realize that you can't. And we're all very much the same when it comes to that if we have a gambling addiction.
I was in the smoke-free class of 2000. That's what we had, lunch boxes and everything. And guess what? I was a smoker for years. Most of the time when I was gambling, I was a chain smoker when I would sit in a casino. I was in Dare to keep kids off drugs. And guess what? I did some drugs. You know, these things that we're warned about when we're little. So I don't know. You have a wonderful coworker named John Schmidt who goes into the classroom of middle schoolers
And high school, yeah.
and high schoolers and talks to them. And that is something I can't do because I'm not good in that environment. I would use adult words when I probably shouldn't. But also, I just would think I would be in their head going, all right, old man, you're going to tell me I can't do something? Well, I'm going to go do it, and I'll try it myself.
But you know, that was my point before. I think that if you really get educated yourself on where the kids are, you know, what kind of apps are they using, what video games do they play, you know, what kind of experience do they have with loot crates and gambling, and you start throwing these things at them, you'll really get a level of respect that you won't be able to get by just, you know, showing your credentials or sharing your lived experience. Once that connection, that's what John does, once that connection is made, then you can take that and expand it. Then they're much more willing to listen and understand because they think that you know what you're talking about. And once they believe that, they're much more open. But, you know, like everything else, like like the DARE program, I remember, what was that? Reefer Madness when I was a kid about marijuana. Seriously, there was a movie that they showed in school. Did anybody ever see that? Right? And they had these monsters that and like we would like look at it and say, what? I mean, that doesn't work. We can't use Reefer Madness in the gambling field, right? But what we can do is ask them questions like, how many lines have you already crossed? When I have a 25-year-old come into my group, and I say to them, you know, let's say they live with their parents, or their main harm is financial. Yeah, they're lying, of course, but they're not there because of the lies. They're there because of the money, right? So I say to them, look, you're going to hear from a lot of different experiences. You're going to hear this one got a divorce. This one committed a crime to further his or her gambling. This one lost a relationship with their children. And this one actually attempted suicide. And you can take two approaches. You can say, I didn't do that, and I don't think I belong here. Or the healthier approach would be, I didn't do that, and that's why I need to be here. Because we all say, I know the GA people out there know the word yet. I haven't done that yet. And that is a powerful word to use. So I'll say to somebody, okay, if you don't think that there's these lines you're going to cross, if I asked you a year and a half ago when you first started gambling, did you ever think you were going to be in debt this amount of money? Did you ever think that you were going to bet these kind of bets, or lie as much to your parents, or miss work or school as a result of your gambling? You would have said I was crazy. Just like you may say I'm crazy now if I say this is what awaits for you in the future. Not that you're going to experience every harm, but clearly you're going to experience more harm the longer you gamble. And you know, it's that kind of connection I think that they can relate to rather than, you know, being dictated to.
Yeah, and that rings so true. I remember when I gambled and, you know, it was like, oh, I can't pay my bills this month. Man, this is low. I'll never get lower than this. And then it was, oh, wow, I've accumulated a lot of debt. Man, I'm never going to get lower than this. And then it was, oh, gosh, I just filed bankruptcy. Can't get lower than this, can it? And it just keeps going. And I remember thinking, I will never, ever, ever get to bankruptcy. I will never get to bankruptcy. And then sure enough, that last day that I gambled, July 23rd of 2014, that next thing I did after that, after stopping, was going to a lawyer to file bankruptcy because I had already worked 3 jobs in my life to repay my gambling debt. And I was like, I'm not doing that again. And, you know, there's people who say that bailouts are no good, and I understand that, but I was in a position where this is sort of my only choice. And I had a wonderful experience with bankruptcy, and I get no bailouts, but if it's bail them out with bankruptcy or they're suicidal, I'll go with the bankruptcy, because that is less harmful. Just to throw out a few things so that way you guys know who is talking to you at this moment, Jeff and I were both suicidal. We both spent time in a hospital from being suicidal. So I say that because we like to say these things out loud, so that way if anybody else is feeling that way or anybody has questions about that sort of thing, you can absolutely ask us. That's the only reason I throw that out there. But
It's freeing. It's freeing to be able to accept that's what you did and here you are now. You know, to me that's successful recovery. But I wanted to, I also wanted to mention, getting back to the sports thing, you know, there's a lot of roadblocks that can be put in place. You know, Dr. Fine talked about Gamban that they can put on their computers. Giving control of your finances to a loved one, whether you're young enough and live with your parents, maybe having your parent be your monitor, or somebody, your partner or your spouse. But I will tell you, Brian, none of these things could have prevented me from gambling if I really wanted to gamble. Do you feel the same way? I mean, there was no roadblock that was good enough, that was solid enough to keep me from gambling if I wanted to. So, I mean, for me, what are roadblocks? Roadblocks are great for putting distance between my thought of gambling and the ability to gamble. And that's why it's so challenging with sports betting and with other online gambling. You know, there's no distance. Once that thought comes, you just pick up your phone and you're in there as quickly as you can send a text message. And I know you were single at the time and young. You didn't have a spouse, but I had to make up these creative, imaginative, devious stories as to why I wasn't home to my wife. Oh, she thought I was the hardest working guy in the state because I'm at the office. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. Oh, what do you mean? You're trying to track me? We have bad Wi-Fi. I mean, everything you can imagine. But now, if I was in active addiction, I could sit next to her on the couch. I'd be gambling away, and she would not think twice because it's normalized. Everybody's on their phone. Everybody's texting or looking stuff up on the internet. I mean, how difficult it is for the person in recovery today, because there's really very little to prevent them from impulses and from following through on their impulses.
yeah, there's no way I would have survived phone gambling. I couldn't have separated myself. I needed gas money to gamble. And so that was enough friction where if I didn't have gas money, I couldn't gamble. So having it on your phone, I don't envy this generation at all. We are going to take some questions. And if anybody has any questions about anything, Jeff has a question. And while Susan walks back there with the microphone, Jeff, you're going to be on the podcast now. It's going to get released. Your voice is going to come over.
Don't expect any compensation.
This is so exciting. I have a question about the companies that you mentioned, the FanDuel and the DraftKings. Most of those companies have developed either responsible gambling programs or they've hired an entire department, and many of them have been staffed from people who were previously with state affiliates. I'm just curious what your take is on the state of those organizations. Do you believe that they're making progress and there truly is a belief in the importance of protecting players?
Oh boy.
We know some people that you are referring to. I don't believe in the organization as a whole, but I believe in the people, having known them in those organizations, in those tough spots, who are trying to do good. But do I think that DraftKings is going to all of a sudden be like, you know what, we should really look out for people with a gambling addiction? Because you have to remember, and this is what I always get told, responsible gambling is not problem gambling. These are two separate things. And the industry as a whole does not deal with problem gambling, does not mention addiction. So they are dealing with these people at the top of the water, not the ones drowning to the bottom. They're dealing with somebody who needs to set a limit. Okay, I set the limit, what now? Well, we can't help you. We told you to set a limit. And I don't know any 22-year-old who is going to go on a website and read 2 pages of materials covering how they should be responsible while gambling before they're like, I just want to place a bet, man. I don't want to, you know, let me just place the bet. I don't want to read all this. So unless it became mandated to actually do these things to help people, I don't see it being helpful. You can tell people, you know, responsible gambling to me is the equivalent of telling someone to breathe. It's like, yeah, duh, I'm going to set a budget. Of course I'm going to set a budget. I took $200 with me. That's my budget. It's not, you know, like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize. I thought I was supposed to gamble my bank account away the whole time.
I have a little different view of it, although I agree with Brian in terms of there has to be better messaging in terms of the distinction between problem gambling and responsible gambling. But I think that prevention is very important. You know, as somebody that works for a state council like here in Minnesota, prevention is a big part of what we do. So when we go to outreach into communities, we're not talking to the people that have a gambling problem necessarily, but maybe people that are just new to gambling or want to experience it or gamble socially. What they should be aware of, what they can do if they find themselves, you know, gambling a little too much. I mean, I have friends that gamble. I don't consider them as problem gamblers, but have I ever seen them lose more than they had set out to lose? Of course. I mean, they cross those lines. And for those people, I think a reminder is helpful. The ability to have a cooling off period is helpful. But gosh, for guys like Brian and me, absolutely not. I mean, for us, the only responsible gambling is not gambling. And, you know, we have to really make sure if that messaging is coming from those operators that we know who it's targeted to. And that's where the confusion is, because, you know, a problem gambler that hasn't really accepted the problem yet sees that, oh, maybe I can still gamble and I'll use that tool. Yeah, they'll use it. They won't, right?
There's another question.
Wow.
Hello.
Questions.
My name is Riley. My question is, you talked a little bit about the difference between like fully chance-based games versus kind of strategy and skill-based games. And I was wondering if you guys see or recognize kind of any differences in the needs of folks in each of those communities as far as support goes, or also like associated stigma.
I use an example from our support group, Jeff's support group that he runs that I'm in from time to time. There's a gentleman in there who was absolutely 100% a professional poker player. And he, at one point, again, not to trigger anybody and mention numbers, but he took a pot of, I think, $400,000.
Life-changing amounts of money at 22, 23 years old.
And he's in the exact same support group I am in, just sitting there across the screen from me. So I respect, you know, professional poker players who are like, this is a skill game and I can do it. And if they're able to participate in it in that avenue and not go out and gamble too much or get off their strategy, then I'm happy for them. To me, it's all gambling. But special treatment for...
Well, you know, I think like you suggested, acknowledge that they have skill. I mean, these people do have skills, whether it's poker or even sports betting, day trading. They have the knowledge and skills. And I don't think it's enough to say, well, just don't gamble because gambling has risk. No, acknowledge they have skills. But like, I'll ask a question like, what was the last thing you purchased from your winnings? And 9 times out of 10, they're not going to be able to answer you. Because what did they do for their winnings? They just gambled more. And when was the last time you deviated from your skilled-based plan? Well, the last time was when I lost a hand of poker when I should have won that hand. So I wasn't going to just accept that. Then I doubled up because I wanted to get that back. And those are all problematic. People can't maintain their skill-based plan. And that's a sign of a problem.
Well, this has been wonderful. Thank you. We're going to move on to our next presentation.
Come on.
But
Can we just stay in these chairs?
Come on.
You could, I suppose, if you'd like. Thank you.
Don't forget your phone.
Oh, yeah.